Antes do Brasil da coroa, existe o Brasil do cocar.
Great. Well, welcome all. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. I know we're gathered together from all over the world for today's webinar hosted by the Agroecology Fund and co-hosted by the International Fund for Indigenous Peoples for a conversation about Indigenous peoples' food systems and agroecology, synergies, and convergences. I can see people are entering their names, where they're from in the chat. Please go ahead. We welcome you to introduce yourselves. Can we move the slide, please? I want to indicate for people, for our participants today, to activate the interpretation, which is on the lower part of your screen. You can see circled there an image of a globe. And please click on that, and then you will find the language that you can choose in English, French, or Spanish. Great. And then we also have a question and answer function also found on the bottom of your screen, where you can put your comments and your questions, and we will leave time during the course after we hear from our speakers to get to your questions and comments, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you. Just a quick word about the Agroecology Fund, and I'll say a word about myself. So I'm Daniel Moss, one of the co-directors of the Agroecology Fund, and I'm speaking to you today from Boston, Massachusetts in the US, home of the Massachusetts people. And the Agroecology Fund is a global fund supporting agroecology movements around the globe, working in all of their breadth and diversity. From practice to science and research to movement building. And we rely on a kind of unique participatory model of trust-based philanthropy to support organizations and networks that are moving forward indigenous food systems and agroecological food systems towards a transformation of our food systems in order to respect the rights of Mother Earth, human rights, and create a stable planet and a biodiverse ecosystem. Please to the next slide. And we are a global fund which has been operating for the past 10 years or so, working around the globe currently over the period of our time, the last decade, in about 88 countries. And we have a special focus on some regional funds that we have been co-creating in Mexico, India, and East and West Africa. And we provide grants of various sizes to organizations and networks that are scaling agroecology up and out in their territories. And today we're going to hear especially about the grantee partners that we are working with, about more or less about a third of the grantees that we work with that are led by Indigenous peoples. And we're going to explore today the synergies between Indigenous peoples' food systems and agroecological food systems. Where do they overlap? Where do they work together? We'll travel to Asia with our speakers. We'll travel to Asia, to Africa, to Latin America, and hear about key topics such as the spiritual dimension of Indigenous peoples' food systems, the role of women in the management of biodiversity and food security, And we'll talk about how the indigenous people struggles to defend their rights and their territories, and the agroecology movement can grow in strength together. So we're really looking forward to this conversation. And again, we'll hear from a host of speakers, and then we look forward to interacting with you and our audience as we head towards discussion. But before we get too deep into our speakers, can we advance the next slide, please? Just wanted to introduce who they are, and we'll say a few short words about each speaker before they take the microphone. But we're really pleased to have with us Milka Poirier, Sopol Saint-Toi, Daniel Kobe, Maria Pedro, Sarah Mancala, and Isapi Rua. And I'll say again a little biographical notes, but we'll enter into the chat a longer piece about who they are and what kind of work that they do. But before we get to the speakers, if we can advance the slide, please. We wanted to just take the temperature of who we are in the room today. So we would ask you if you can say where you're from. And we have here a poll that we can activate. And if you would take a second to indicate where you're from, we have here the Americas, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Oceania Pacific. So please take a second to just indicate where you're from. We'd love to know who's with us today. And you can just vote right on the screen. And yes, this will be recorded for later viewing, and we'll send out a short summary of what we've discussed today. Looking forward to sharing with you our conversation, so we can continue to share it with other people as well that are not able to join us. So please take a minute to say where you're from. Let's see, Catherine, do we have some results? Okay, so you can see the breadth of our conversation this morning. From the Americas, from Africa, about 20%, from Asia, about 10%, and Europe, about 20%. And our colleagues in the far reaches of Oceania, where it's quite late, are not able to join us this morning, but we're proud at the Agroecology Fund to support some excellent work with partners in that region of the world. Let's turn to the next slide, please. So we wanted to just get a sense, if we may, about how do you participate in Indigenous peoples' food systems? And here we offer some answers that you can indicate, which would be that I cultivate in an Indigenous peoples' food systems. I do research. I work with Indigenous peoples' communities. I fund Indigenous peoples' organizations, networks, and I am curious, want to learn more. So if you can just take a second to indicate which of those best describes you, we'll get a sense of who's in the room. Thank you. So you can vote right on your screen. We'll gather up the results. Okay, so you can see here, I'll read these off for our interpreters. We have about 17% of people cultivate, 37% do research, 38% work with Indigenous peoples communities, 15% fund Indigenous peoples, and a lot of people, 45%, are curious, want to learn more. Fantastic. We're very happy to have you all. So yeah, let's turn now to our speakers. Now, I just wanted to say a quick word about, first of all, a huge thanks to our interpretation team. So again, just to reiterate, if you joined a little bit late, that you can activate the interpretation on the bottom of your screen in a globe that says interpretation, and you can choose the language that best suits you. But yes, we're really happy to have our interpreters with us, and we will be sharing the webinar tape or the recording with you all, so that you can share it with your friends and colleagues thereafter. We also have with us Isapi Rua, who is an indigenous journalist who will be listening in and subsequently writing about this piece. She's from an indigenous reporters network from Bolivia, from the Guarani people. So we're really happy to have somebody with us who can help us interpret what we learned today and communicate it out to a broader audience. So let's move right into one of the first speaker, which would be Milka Chekporir. And Milka Chekporir has contributed a video to our conversation this morning because she's unable to join us from Kenya. And Milka is an advisor to the Agroecology Fund. And Milka is from the Sengwar people in Kenya, and has been working with her communities for many years now. For the last 6 years, she's been working with her community to address land tenure issues in their ancestral land, and has been working on food systems, on agroecological food systems. So let's hear from Milka. Some words she's sharing about, to her, what are indigenous peoples' food systems? What really do they? How might you define them? What are they composed of? So let's play the video and hear from Milka.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, anyone respective of your time zones. My name is Milka Chepkorir. I am of the indigenous people of Sengwer in Cherangani Hills here in Kenya. And I serve as one of the advisory board members of the Agroecology Fund. I take this opportunity to really welcome you to the webinar on indigenous food systems, as this is one of the topics that we have really been looking forward to speak about, and its linkages to agroecology and the principles of agroecology, especially in this time when we have so much affecting food systems around climate change and its effects, which include droughts, the excessive floods, and the very many other aspects that have changed even the species of foods that people are growing and what the world is consuming every day. So I take really this opportunity to welcome you all to the webinar, and to hope that what we are going to discuss in this webinar is going to be of value to your work, to the work of the communities you work in, and also to the general world, because again, just the same way climate change has no boundaries, is the same way good or bad food has no boundaries. It flows everywhere as long as there are people in need of food. And I definitely bet that there's no one that doesn't need food, especially at this moment. And what kind of food we're eating every time we have to consume something. So I'll talk to you about what indigenous food systems are, and why they are important in this kind of a discussion. And more importantly, just link on what linkages exist between indigenous food and agroecology and the principles of agroecology. And I hope that through that, then we get to know why I personally just really serve the Agroecology Fund with passion, because being indigenous and fighting for the rights of indigenous people, which include the right to land, is at the end of it, by the less minimum, our right to food, our right to our own food, not just food, and the food that is not seen by others, defining food systems as food systems. So indigenous people have different ways of different food systems. I am a forest hunter-gatherer, and my community depend more on the food systems that we get from the forest. So I'd say that's the first principle, that most of the indigenous food systems, I say all of them, depend on our environment and our land and our connection to the same land, because then it goes beyond the connection to how we take care of that land to get the best of the foods that we have. And the other main principle is sustainability of how we produce our own food. So in the case of forest hunter-gatherers, our main source of the forest as food is our honey. And that then goes to connecting to the trees that grow in these areas, most of them flowering. And the respect that we give to flowering trees, and all trees in our region is the same respect that we give to a pregnant woman or to any mother, because it gives life just like a mother would give life. And so we have rituals, we have beliefs that guide how we interact with our trees and how we take care of them in every season of the year, hoping of course for the next season when we have plenty of honey to help us for food, for medicine, or even to preserve our wild meat. So that is also to say that our food systems also depend on the wild animals in the forest. Even though those aspects have been changed by policy and practice over time because of the criminalization of eating wild meat, we still use our honey to preserve food and meat from domestic animal or even from the wild, sometimes when we get the wild meat from the wild. And that is for forest indigenous communities. Of course, we have very many other foods and fruits and things that we gather from the forest, and tubes, like the tubers in some of the plants in the forest that we still consume. So those are our food systems, you know. And for pastoral communities who are also indigenous people, they have their livestock, their pastoral, so they have sheep, goat, cows, camels, from which they get milk, from which they get the meat that they eat, and that is their food system. Again, like I said before, these food systems that are related to meat, pure meat and milk, or the hunting and gathering of fruits, of herbs, and the wild meat and honey from the forest, which are now typical indigenous food systems, are not regarded as food systems by many of the agricultural corporations or the many multilaterals that are working on food security or food production. Why? Because they don't think they feed as many, or maybe because these kind of foods do not flow into the commercialized and capitalized markets like others would do. It is of course different when you look at the pastoral way of life, because then the rangers, the many farmers farming many flocks of sheep, of cows for meat and for milk, are now taking over what typical indigenous people pastoral livelihood is. And so it just shades off or creates a shadow against the ways in which indigenous people live and produce the foods they produce sustainably. Again, these two sets of food systems, the pastoral indigenous food systems and the hunter-gatherer indigenous food systems, all of them are really grounded on the land on which these indigenous people live on and have connection and care about. And how they do that, for example, is how hunter-gatherers do manage their sections of the land, is first by taking care of the trees, like I said, and zoning these lands to make sure that there's just a region on which we put beehives, traditional beehives, to have sections that you know are for herbs, and which sections have many of the wild fruits to be collected. And these are managed very sustainably, that you don't get the herbs or the fruits from one place for too long. Neither do you have to get the whole honey from the beehive. You have to leave some so that the bees feed on, and then the next season you have bees. Otherwise, they migrate out of the beehive. And the one that I see is very interesting is the food systems of the pastoralists. Many of you working with pastoral communities, or even read about how pastoral communities manage their pasture, is that they move, and then they are called nomads. And people in the civilized world do not think nomadism is a sustainable way of taking care of pasture and taking care of the milk and the meat production, the quality of the meat and the quality of the milk. Many people would think they just move around aimlessly, which is missing the point completely. Pastoral communities, by the sense of moving from one region to another, is informed by seasons, is informed by weather patterns, and is mainly informed by letting the land restore itself before they come back to feed their animals on the very nutritious shoots of the grass underwater on the land at a specific season of the year or at a specific period of when the shoots of the grass is up. And it informs so much on how they feed and the quality of the meat and the milk that they get out of that. And you look at all those and reflect on the principles of agroecology, then you would say agroecology is equal to indigenous food systems, really, because it is all both really embedded on sustainable use and sustainable production of food, making sure that the soil is not exploited like it is exploited by the commercial food production systems that we have right now, or the massive cropping of one crop just for people to get money out of, or the use of chemicals that is happening in the monoculture world. So it's based on sustainability, based on taking care of the environment, based on the respect of the soil, although it goes now for indigenous food systems, goes beyond to look at the respect that people give not just to the physical, but to the spiritual and to the ancestors, because we know that we are accountable to the people who took care of the land before us, and now we have to take care of it for the people who will come in future. But when you talk about the land, it's not just the soil, but it's what we get out of this soil to be able to eat, what our animals are getting out of this soil to be able to eat and then feed us, and to be able to breathe the good air and to get the good herbs that then sustains our health as indigenous people in these territories. And I'd say that if the world has to address climate change issues or address the very many other challenges that we are having right now, it would be to produce food agroecologically and to produce food based on indigenous people's principles and the way in which we respect the land from which we eat. So I really hope that this webinar becomes of importance to all of us, and we can go out there to make sure that we are taking care of the land on which then we depend on and we expect to get life on. There's no way we can get what we don't give. And I think the planet and the climate is really teaching us that we can only get good food if we give back to the soil, back to the air, what it deserves. And that would be to respect indigenous people's food systems and not disregard them just because it doesn't fit the monetization value that corporates are laying out there. So I really wish you all the best in this webinar. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to sit with you virtually, but by this message, I hope you enjoy the webinar, and let's go out, be good ambassadors of taking care of the planet and our food systems. Thank you all.
Beautiful. Thank you, Milka. We appreciate your presence virtually, even though you're unable to join us. Yeah, a big applause for Milka, and thank you so much, Milka, for sharing with us your perspective. I loved that she spoke about breathing good air, and we were there with her in her territory, in the Sengwer territory in Kenya, looking at that gathering storm. I hope it yielded some rain in her land. We heard about the connection to land. We heard about the climate adaptation. We heard about the indigenous people's food system being really the foundation of modern agroecology. So really grateful to learn from her and that kind of broad framing as we move on to our next speaker. And our next speaker, we're moving farther east into Asia to be joined by the Karen Environmental and Social Network, known by their acronym KESAN. And we're really pleased to have with us
everyone.
Paul Saint-Toi to join with us. KESAN is a community-based non-governmental nonprofit organization that works to improve livelihood security and to gain respect for indigenous people's knowledge and rights in the Karen state of Burma. So with that brief introduction, and we'll provide a longer biography in the chat, I would like to pass the microphone on to Paul Saint-Toi. Thank you, Paul, for sharing with us.
I'm Mumu from KESAN, and I would like to share a message about indigenous peoples, food systems, and agroecology. KESAN reflection on territorial rights and indigenous food systems. Gautule, the indigenous current homeland in southeastern Burma, is of great importance to global biodiversity. In an area that has suffered from over 70 years of civil war, the territory is now dedicated to generating peace and protecting biodiversity, indigenous current culture and customary land governance. Current communities define food sovereignty as the well-being, or Taumushopper, of human beings and more than human beings, such as the deity residing in the land, forests, and waters. The understanding of well-being extends beyond the present and future generations, encompassing the world of the afterlife as well. In our indigenous territories, beliefs are deeply intertwined with the natural landscape. Customer leaders guide the whole community as they decide collectively how to use and care for their land and forest sustainably. An example of these knowledge practices embodied in current oral teachings such as this. We who drink water must take care of waters. We who eat from the land must take care of the land. Only when we maintain the balance will our well-being be sustained. Practicing traditional knowledge is crucial to our food systems. The use of natural resources is facilitated through diverse agricultural systems, while the care is achieved through ecological conservation. The golden rule for all these agricultural systems is that use and care must always be paired with biodiversity as the foundation. Maintaining biodiversity helps us mitigate, adapt, and survive natural disasters. This poem teaches us what our ancestors have done in the past. Mother told us to save yam species. Father told us to save taro species. When we preserve up to 30 varieties, if famine comes, we will not die. The Salary Peace Park and Thothi Ta'u Indigenous Park spread over 10,000 square kilometers within our Gautule homeland, each equipped with its grassroots governance structures. In the Salary Peace Park, community rice banks provide relief to the villagers that face food shortages due to natural disaster or armed conflict. Current community employ intercropping to maintain soil fertility, tackle pests, and insect issues, and decrease the availability of nutritional foods. Practice of seed saving and exchange of indigenous varieties of crops allow current people to adapt better to climate change, while the rainfalls are getting more unpredictable. Also in the Salary Peace Park, community groups have revitalized fish conservation zones. Fishing conservation zones were once a common practice, but had decreased due to conflict and displacement. Now multiple communities have re-established a vast network of fish conservation zones that are helping to preserve clean water and support fish populations and rich watershed forests. The key to securing food sovereignty and the well-being of custodial communities is defending and sustaining a healthy biodiverse territory with community-led governance, because diversity is strength. Thank you.
Paul, did you want to speak now or wait to questions?
Can wait to question. Yeah. I have my colleague, my young colleague, while I'm on travels and in the meetings, my colleague is very kind to help me record this video and share with you all. And yes, I'm very happy to take questions and also learn from you and others, like Milka. She's covered everything. It's wonderful, and to see our indigenous peoples in other regions also, are doing their best to kind of maintain our indigenous food systems.
Beautiful. Thank you, Paul. And please thank your colleague for sharing with us that beautiful video. And we'll get to your questions. And that's a reminder, people, our participants in this webinar, and we now have 332 participants. So we're really happy to be joined by so many people from all around the world talking about this incredibly important and inspiring work. But please use this function on your screen called Q&A if you have any questions for Paul, his colleague, Milka, anybody, and we'll share discussion following the presentations. But let's now turn to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Daniel Kobe from the Agroecology Peoples Development Program in Kenya, not far from where we just heard from our colleague Milka Chekporir in Kenya. And Daniel Kobe is the founder and executive director of the Agroecology Peoples Development Program, known by the acronym OPDP. It's a Kenyan-based NGO working to secure human and land rights of the indigenous Agroecology community and other indigenous peoples across Kenya and Africa. We're very grateful for you this morning or this evening, Daniel, for joining us. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, my namesake, for this opportunity. I find it a very honor. I know I will not have wished to be, because most of you have heard of the challenges we are facing in Mao, which has affected some of our work. But I can say that Agroecology Peoples Development Program is an NGO based in Kenya. For the sake of this meeting, I wish to say that we are also hosting hunter-gatherers network, where we have the Ogiek, the Sengwer, the Yaku, the Ogiek of Mount Elgon, the Wayu, the Were, the Boni. All these are some of our indigenous communities which we are working together. And when we discuss about agroecology for us and how we can begin to strengthen this particular subject, we see it in a broader perspective, where we look at it as not only food for us, and we see it in a broader way, because everything we do, we link it to our land and tenure system, where land is key, because without land you cannot really produce food, or you may not be able to achieve whatever. Milka addressed a lot about honey, which is also key amongst the Ogiek community. But we see honey not only in terms of food, we see it in three ways. One, honey as food, as stable food for the Ogiek community, and many other hunter-gatherer community, which Milka mentioned. We also see it as having a spiritual perspective, where for us, Ogiek, we use honey for everything, during our ceremonies, initiations, and such like. And also, we use it as medicinal. In most of medicines done by Ogiek, we use honey, and there are different types of honey, from the stingless bees and from the other type of bees, which most of you know about it. And then, of course, we also see it as beekeeping as a way of climate change. It's a very sustainable climate change mechanism, and it has really been used. But for us, when we are trying to stabilize, because Agroecology Fund has supported us with the Yaku and the Sengwer, and the Ogiek of Mao. And we have done a very nice report, which we'll be releasing in months' time, which it has documented. One of the issues for this food system is documentation, which we think it is best when we document our food systems, which most of the indigenous communities face with one challenge of documenting their food system. Because I remember some years back in late 80s, when I visited Nairobi for the first time. And then one of the issues is that if you could not ask for indigenous vegetables in a hotel, you will look like you are very behind and very uncivilized, because you'll only be asked for cabbage and then sukuma wiki. But if you ask for managu, for those who may know, they will look at you like a village guy. But now with the health challenges which have come, everybody has shifted to these particular indigenous food systems or foodware for the health. I think the driving force is the new health challenges people are facing, diabetes, high blood pressure, and all these kind of has made people now to say, I think we go back to the old system of food and the way we have our food. So most of the indigenous vegetables now we are trying to grow them, and we started having even our women and in all these communities we are working with to start planting managus and all these kind of indigenous vegetables, and they have started using it because it is also having good, it is also being bought and it has market. It's only that the production may not be sufficient, but it has enough market in most of the supermarkets in Kenya. Similar with honey, everybody, and they always say that we don't have enough supply for honey, and there's been challenges because of climate change. There have been a lot of farming where people are using a lot of chemicals and such like, and that's why we resorted to a new using manure, using all sides of. But one of the greatest challenge which we have is that there are no seeds. Sometimes we don't get seeds for this particular type of indigenous crops or even wild berries. We are also trying to see how we can domesticate some of the berries and tubers which are in our forest, which always, even some scientists seems not to be helping us a lot in trying to see how to convert some of these berries or some of these tubers and such like to become domesticated and to be grown and have even a seed bank. Having seed bank even for the indigenous vegetables or indigenous foods is a problem. And when we go back to the way in Kenya where we eat nyama choma and the rest, people are changing. The way we used to do it is different, and how we used to preserve our meat, people don't look at it as very sustainable, but we used not to have fridges or a way of putting food. We used to put our meat, especially wild game, and we roast it and keep it, we dried. With the smoke, we smoke them and all these kind of, and it used to give us good health and many of these kind of. And when I will, because I don't want to repeat a lot of things which Milka mentioned, because we have a lot of similarities, especially being hunter-gatherers, is that some of the key challenges we have now is our land tenure system, whereby most of us, especially Ogiek in Kenya now, are facing eviction, which is caused by some say it is because of carbon credit initiated. We are not very sure about that. We have also a lot of issues, but Kenya wants to become a climate champion, which it is affecting us negatively. But maybe I didn't want to discuss much in this particular forum, but some of you have been giving us solidarity messages, which we have been facing as indigenous peoples here in Kenya. And I'll also say that we need to do a lot of documentation. We need to also see how much research has been done on food systems, how much information has been given, and the way people are taking in indigenous knowledge as a way of even promoting our food system. Because if we don't promote the traditional knowledge or the knowledge of indigenous people, we might have challenges. So because many people, even when you tell people we can use manure, I remember telling people, say it takes time. We want things which grow fast so that we can sell to the market and do this using this kind of. And then when you go to most of the agricultural places and ask them, do you have seeds for this particular kind of plant for use? They say, oh, those one we don't. They are not within the one we are supposed to be doing for research, because they are somehow having seed places where they keep a lot of seeds for their whatever. So as I close, I will, maybe because of time, I have a lot of stories to tell you. There is a lot to be done on conservation and restoration. And until we do that, we'll still have challenges in how we deal with our food system. Because otherwise, we will theoretically do things and theorize the agroecology. Because one time I was with some government officers and they say, what is this agroecology? We don't believe in it. It is just changing some wording. to another one, but this is how it should be. But one thing I will want to support Agroecology Fund is the interest to really support a traditional food system, especially the trying to encourage indigenous knowledge as far as food systems are concerned. So above all these, so when we are evicted in our lands and thrown out, it is one of the issues is you are killing our food system. You are killing the future of those indigenous peoples when you remove them within their own ecosystem. I close it there. Thank you.
Ooh, our hearts are with you and your people, Danielle, and thank you so much for sharing that story. And yes, you know, we have been trying to mobilize solidarity with you over these during this present crisis, which we know has been going on for a very long time, as Ojiek and other peoples fight to protect their territories, their seeds, their food systems. It's a struggle that requires a lot of internal work in your communities, but also a lot of international solidarity, and we are with you. Thank you. So thank you, Daniel, for joining us from Kenya. And we now are going to move over to the Americas. And we're really pleased to have with us this morning, Maria Pedro. And Maria Pedro is from the Ualalense Women's Association for Pishkan Konob Development. She's joining us today from Guatemala. And her organization works with a network called the Alianza Mesoamericana de Pueblos y Bosques. Maria Pedro has been working to support the strengthening of agroecological farming practices based on ancestral Mayan knowledge for the past 15 years. And we're really pleased to have you with us today, Maria Pedro. So I want to turn the microphone over to you. Thank you so much. Please go ahead. Adelante.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos los coordinadores y coordinadoras de este evento webinar, también a las compañeras y compañeros panelistas. Reciban un saludo fraternal en nombre de María Pedro de Pedro, del área Anjobal, Santa Eulalia, Huehuetenango, Guatemala. Para mí también es una emoción, una alegría escuchar a hermanos, hermanas con una amplia experiencia en cuestiones de los conocimientos ancestrales, cómo lo estamos conservando, practicando, también divulgando desde nuestras comunidades. En primer lugar, pues en este momento pues voy a tener a bien la oportunidad de presentar un panorama general sobre nosotras como mujeres, como lideresas, como hermanas o como hermanos, mujeres indígenas y sistemas ancestrales de siembra a nivel de Mesoamérica. Y algo lo muy importante acá es también nosotras como mujeres, la conexión espiritual con la madre tierra, la cosmovisión de nuestros ancestros, el respeto a los espíritus del bosque, ¿verdad? Que todo va relacionado, la solidaridad de siembra en colectivos, compartimos los resultados de la cosecha. En este sentido, este principio es más que todo cuando se hace la siembra, se involucra a todos los integrantes de la familia, incluso hay un trueque de mano de obra entre nosotros en sí. Cuando hacemos la siembra, también nos prevalecemos mucho de la luna, observamos las fases de la luna y el cambio de clima para definir los tiempos de la siembra. Es así como nosotras hemos venido trabajando como mujeres desde nuestras áreas, y esto no solo se enfoca a un solo
We're having difficulty hearing you. María Pedro, no se escucha bien.
la señal.
Sí.
Veo que se fue la señal. ¿Ahora sí?
Sí.
Va. Lamentablemente donde estoy ubicado está lloviendo fuerte y está muy nublado y eso hace que baja la señal del internet. Y en esta parte también algo muy importante y hemos venido evaluando si estamos ubicados en diferentes países, pero nuestros principios ancestrales hay mucha coherencia entre ellas, las cuales estamos mencionando en este momento. Por ejemplo, recuperamos el intercambio de las semillas nativas, ¿verdad? Entre diferentes, tanto como en otros países, igual también en Guatemala, en nuestras comunidades, en el clima cálido, en clima frío, pues hay semillas diferentes y también hemos tenido la oportunidad de hacer estos intercambios de semillas. También se rotan las áreas de siembra para descansar también la tierra, ¿verdad? También es uno de los principios no explotar el 100%, sino se rotan los espacios. También asociamos los cultivos que se benefician entre sí. No se utiliza químicos, solo se mezcla de plantas que sirve de repelentes y de abonos orgánicos. Específicamente son los principios, nuestros principios ancestrales, las cuales lo hemos venido manejando, aplicando, conservando, divulgando, promocionando con nuestras hermanas lideresas que también en este momento como portavoz de este evento, que estos son lo que nosotros hemos visualizado a nivel general, como un panorama general de lideresas a nivel de Mesoamérica. Nuestra prioridad también es asegurar la soberanía alimentaria, promover una economía propia con identidad cultural. ¿Por qué? Porque desde nuestras comunidades nosotros recolectamos nuestra semilla, lo sembramos, le damos mantenimiento, lo vemos crecer, abonamos la madre tierra, lo cosechamos, lo consumimos y al mismo tiempo lo vendemos. De eso se trata, ¿verdad? Todo lo que hacemos un proceso, también hay un espacio, ¿verdad? Donde uno tiene que ver todo ese proceso, una interrelación del uno del otro a nivel de herencias, pero también vivimos la tierra sin hacerle daño, ¿sí? Eso lo tenemos bien claro. La madre tierra tenemos que cuidarla, tenemos que respetarla, tenemos que valorarla, porque sin ella no tendremos un sistema de alimenticios nutritivo para garantizar una vida saludable como seres humanos. Lo tomamos solo lo necesario y eso es lo que algo muy importante que nosotros lo vemos como mujeres. Nosotras las mujeres estamos inmersos desde las actividades domésticas, las actividades agrícolas y las actividades forestales. ¿Por qué? Mucho, tiene que ver mucho una interrelación. Tenemos que valorar los bosques, porque de los bosques viene el agua. Sin el agua, nuestras actividades domésticas no será posible realizar todos los días en nuestro diario vivir. Sin una madre tierra bien protegida, bien conservada, bien nutritiva, no nos va a generar una producción nutritiva para nosotros y a dónde nos conlleva, nos lleva a una desnutrición, problemas de salud desde nuestra familia y si la economía, si no tenemos la capacidad económica para llevar con un médico, de ahí esto se va a ir aumentando estos problemas desde el seno de la familia. Por eso nosotros consideramos, vivimos de la tierra sin hacerle daño. Para ella la respetamos, cuidamos el medio ambiente, cuidamos la madre tierra, hacemos uso racional del agua, hacemos uso racional de la leña, también tratamos la manera de reducir el uso de los desechos sólidos, promocionamos la reducción del uso de agroquímicos, que sabemos muy bien que eso hace daño en nuestras vidas. De ahí parte también ya la experiencia propia. Nosotros, nuestro lema, el cambio tiene que partir de nosotras, hermanas y hermanos. Nosotros tenemos que estar convencidos que la agroecología es la idónea que debemos de practicar, promocionar, apropiar, empoderar, porque es el bien para nosotros y para todos los hermanos y hermanas que nos escuchan en este momento. Desde mi perspectiva como mujer, desde el seno de la familia debe haber ese cambio de conciencia, ¿sí? He implementado huertos familiares, cuento con mis huertos familiares. También en este caso, todo con un enfoque agroecológico, todo con procesando mi abono orgánico, el proceso de la selección de las semillas nativas, ¿verdad? Entonces, acá, tanto como persona, tanto como mi función dentro de la organización, estamos promoviendo desde los años atrás. No es hasta ahorita, llevamos varios años y gracias también con los compañeros de USCHE, es un colectivo de 42, 43 organizaciones a nivel nacional de Guatemala y uno de nuestros principios es la implementación de huertos familiares que garantiza una alimentación nutritiva y contribuir para sostener la economía familiar. ¿Cómo es importante tener un huerto que tenga un apazote, cilantro, hierbabuena, hierbamora, tal vez hierba blanca, mostaza, bledo, repollo, brócoli? Si tengo todo esto dentro de mi alcance, ya solo lo voy a ir a cortar, como vemos en la fotografía, ¿verdad? Voy a ir a cortar y voy a preparar una sopita bien rica, nutritiva, con tortillas calientes, con mis hijas desde el seno de la familia. No tengo necesidad de comprar. Eso estamos contribuyendo en la economía familiar. Y que al mismo tiempo estamos garantizando una alimentación nutritiva a nuestros hijos, a nuestras hijas, desde la familia, desde la comunidad, y lo estamos promocionando desde nuestra organización propiamente en nuestro municipio. No usamos químicos, elaboramos nuestros abonos orgánicos repelentes, naturales, con elementos de nuestro propio entorno. Quisiera hacer una pequeña explicación. Si tenemos ovejas, conejos, cerdo, gallinas, ¿qué debemos de hacer ahí? Jalar todo el estiércol y tenemos broza. Tenemos plantas sembradas que son de especies nativas. Jalamos toda la hojastra, jalamos la broza, jalamos tierra negra, buscamos el sauco, cal desde la cocina, hacemos un proceso de nuestro abono orgánico que ya tenemos acumulado. De ahí parte también nuestra implementación de nuestros huertos familiares. Entonces, prácticamente ahí no tenemos necesidad de usar o de comprar abonos químicos. Conservamos nuestras prácticas ancestrales, incorporando prácticas modernas como la elaboración de estos abonos orgánicos, por supuesto. Una de nuestras experiencias, pues, de nuestros abuelos, abuelas, por ejemplo, es cómo sembraban antes. Antes tenían sus rebaños, una parcela, pasa un corral de ovejas durante un mes, ahí se queda bien nutritiva la tierra y ya solo siembran, ¿verdad? No hay necesidad de usar abono químico. Pero en esta época donde estamos, conforme va a ir aumentando el número de habitantes, hay necesidad ya de ver cómo procesar y integrar toda esa materia prima para contar nuestros abonos orgánicos. De ahí parte lo poco, que no lo poco, sino que también nuestros conocimientos ancestrales milenarios, las cuales los tenemos presente y los seguimos practicando de esta forma. Acá, muy importante es también el fortalecimiento de las crianzas de los animales domésticos. Hablemos las gallinas, los cerdos, las ovejas, los patos, los conejos. Aprovechamos todo este estiércol, lo que ya mencioné hace ratito, el procesamiento de abono orgánico. Pero algo muy importante de esta parte es también el rescate de todos los animales criollos, ¿sí? En nuestra actualidad, muchas veces se habla ya de ¿cómo se llama? De animales ya con fines mejoradas, pero realmente tenemos nuestros animales criollos que tienen una duración de crecimiento, hablemos de 1 año a 9 meses, a comparación, por ejemplo, consumir pollo que crece en 2 meses, prácticamente hay una gran diferencia. Hemos sido todo este proceso de trabajo, pues se ha venido ampliando la variedad de alimentos, diversificar los cultivos. Como dije, la agricultura familiar, nuestras semillas nativas, nuestra diversificación agrícola, la implementación de las redes también de productoras de huevos, tratando la manera integrar los integrantes de la familia para contribuir en la economía familiar y que al mismo tiempo hemos logrado, ¿verdad?, escalando nuestra producción local, brindando un acompañamiento técnico a las compañeras, grupos de mujeres en nuestras comunidades. Estamos también apoyando en cuanto a la comercialización de estos productos, siempre en cuando tengamos.
We may have lost Maria Pedro from Guatemala. She mentioned that there's a big rain there, which was interfering with her connection. So let's see if she'll join again, and we'll put her back on if so. Or Tamara, no sé si estás ahí. I think they have the same connection. She was joined by another colleague. Okay.
Hola, sí, vamos a ver qué pasó. No sé si mientras Hola,
Ay.
María.
Perdón, se va la señal, pero también voy terminando nuestra presentación. Perdone, compañeras y compañeros, espero que me comprendan que cada rato se me corta la voz por la falta de señal. Pero en este proceso, pues como dije hace rato, pues estamos acompañando varios procesos. Y la mayor satisfacción es ver también las hermanas de mi comunidad que están ya empoderadas en los procesos de sus emprendimientos, de empoderamiento económico dentro de la familia. Nosotros las mujeres lo vemos muy integral, nuestra agricultura, nuestra parte ambiental, el cuidar la madre tierra, la no contaminación del medio ambiente y también producir productos locales con un enfoque agroecológico, con un enfoque nutritivo, sin contaminación, de libre contaminación, las cuales también ya se está canalizando con la ley de la alimentación escolar. La ley de alimentación escolar es una ley que fue decretado, si no estoy mal, en el año 2017 en Guatemala, que también da una oportunidad, una gran oportunidad para los pequeños productores en nuestras comunidades de canalizar sus productos, pero con ese enfoque. Y con esto, pues, finalizo esta parte. Después vamos a pasar en la parte ambiental, ¿verdad? Vamos a también ver algunas cuestiones de fotografías de todas nuestras acciones como mujeres en el área anjobal. De esta forma, pues, también insto que no debemos
Let's see, Maria Pedro, if she comes back. We do need to finish up in any case, but thank you for sharing this slide about the environmental aspects of the work. So just to thank, it's fantastic to hear about the leadership of women in their indigenous food systems in Guatemala. Thank you so much, Maria Pedro, for sharing the slides and getting to see the images and understand all the diversity of your food systems. Fantastic to hear about the use of water and the preservation of the forests. And then to understand a little bit about the organizational structure.
Muy bien.
Please, Maria Pedro, if you can finish up, if you could, please go ahead. But if you can finish up, please, that would be great. Thank you.
Ustedes me dirán si sigo con las otras diapositivas o ya estoy fuera del tiempo por corte de señal, sí. Para que también yo respeto a todo el equipo para que tengamos el mismo tiempo de espacio de intervención. Ustedes me dirán.
María, lo que le intenta comunicar él es que mejor que ya haga un mensaje de cierre porque ya se acabó el tiempo. Por favor.
Muy bien. Entonces, muchas gracias, compañeros, compañeras panelistas. Me quedé todavía un otro 25% de inspirar otras acciones que aparecen acá en la diapositiva, pero mil disculpas por cuestión de señal, pues se ha venido cortando. Pareciera ser de informalidad, pero son factores que no están dentro de nuestros alcances y para mí ha sido un gusto de compartir esta experiencia de los principios ancestrales nosotras como mujeres en la agricultura familiar.
Thank you, Maria Pedro, and thank you for your grace and flexibility in continuing with your presentation despite the effects of the rain, and we hope it's a good rain in your community. We'll pass now to our next speaker, and really happy to have with us joining today from the Cosmiwak territory of California in a United States jurisdiction. Joining us is Sarah Moncada, a native educator, dancer, and filmmaker, who is the chief operating officer, the chief executive officer of the Cultural Conservancy, which is a native-led nonprofit working in indigenous land rights and revitalization projects. And Cultural Conservancy is a member of one of the network that is co-sponsoring this webinar today, which is the International Funders of Indigenous People, with which the Agroecology Fund also works very closely. So we're very happy to have with us today Sarah to share her perspective as an important nonprofit organization working with Indigenous peoples and a funder as well. Thank you. Please go ahead, Sarah.
Dios and Chanya, hello. Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone, to this beautiful circle and to all of those that have shared their stories so far. The power of us coming together to share the network of work that's happening far and wide can only ever strengthen us. So thank you for the opportunity. And I'm happy to share just a couple quick slides to help share our story a little bit and the work that we do. So I'm here, as Daniel mentioned, in the Northern American landscape, calling in from Coast Miwok territories, but also deeply acknowledge my ancestral roots. I am a Yaqui woman. I carry ancestry that comes from the beautiful Sonoran desert regionalities of the North American landscape. Before a human being picked up a piece of paper and a pencil and drew a line and called that an international border, and part of it the United States and the other part of that Mexico, that's home. And we are now considered a borderland tribe working with both governments to try and figure out the complexity of what it means to be Indigenous peoples in this landscape. I am very happy to be a part of the circle at the Cultural Conservancy. As Daniel mentioned, we are a native-led nonprofit organization. We are an intertribal organization, meaning that the circle of our team and our people represents the diverse population of native people from across the American continents, what we lovingly call Turtle Island. And through that, very honored to represent those land systems. The work of the Cultural Conservancy, though complex and varied, is also somewhat simple. We are focused on the revitalization of Indigenous lands and ancestral landscapes and ancestral people, and connecting those lands and those peoples so that knowledge systems can thrive in whatever system those folks choose. This is just a quick little version of our landscape. Everywhere you see a dot is somewhere we have projects. We work both regionally, nationally, and internationally on programs that are in direct partnership with communities on the ground. Everything that we do stems from our connections in community and listening to those needs rise, and then figuring out how we might be meaningful in helping in those systems. We work in everything from language revitalization to Indigenous agricultural work to Indigenous media making as a way to share storyscapes. And it's been just deeply wonderful. On the ground where we are in our local ecosystem, honoring the lands beneath our feet, that first dot you see in that lower circle there is the very tip peninsula of the San Francisco Peninsula in the Ramaytush Ohlone language. The Ramaytush Ohlone people are the ancestral peoples of that space. San Francisco is in her original language known as Yelamu. And that we have our offices established there since 1985. We've been in business for almost 40 years now. That second dot that you see right in the middle as you kind of traverse up the slide, north, so to speak, as it were, walks towards one of our larger partnership projects. We've been in partnership there for a little over 10 years now, working on the ground in a community garden project where we are working in seed rematriation projects, in the growing of indigenous foods and medicines, and also working to showcase what it means to step back into traditional practice. What we all know when we're working inside of our food systems is this awareness that we're actually working in cultural practice, that we are returning land-based practice people to land-based practices, and the revitalization of those systems that can include everything from remembering foods and seeds to songs and languages to old systems of original instructions, to the prayers that we give to the sky at night. The third dot that you see there is what I'm going to talk a little bit more about at the top. That takes us up into the Coast Miwok's southern Pomo landscape of the Northern California Peninsula up there. And most of the world knows that area as the Napa Valley wine country, where wine grapes are now currently cultivated as the California agricultural landscape. However, in that area of the land, which is in the United States, one of the most economically rich places of land access, we are now walking through a land back project in kind of returning native lands to native hands. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about in sharing the work of what it means to be an access to both rural and urban indigenous people in this kind of San Francisco Bay Area landscape, and trying to meet the needs of what that means across the larger continuum. Our work, first and foremost, is grounded in indigenous principles of saying that no matter what we do, first we restore the land. First, we return mother back to what she needs to be. Our first step is to, anytime we walk into a land project, sit with community, sit with those tribal elders who maintain that tribal ecological knowledge in that space, and ask for what it means to restore the landscape. Once we restore that landscape, we understand what we mean when we go into wild forest food cultivation or more agro-business style food cultivation, whatever that system is for the tribal group working inside of that system, we say has the right to determine what they want. And they have the right then to establish what it means to move that project forward, and we're there to support that system. This is that second landscape I was talking about, or that kind of first community garden project. I love to talk about that community project because it is a reflection of what it means to have small but mighty work. And I never want to talk about native land access being small in a way that diminishes its capacity or its power. Because what you see here is really only a few rows of cultivation, but we've been able to bring the intertribal native community of the San Francisco and Oakland urban landscape, who are often sitting inside of little to no access to food. Sometimes the only meal that those families can get that day is when they send their children to school and they get a school lunch. And so what we have is an urban accessible food project where we can bring community out and we can plant traditional seeds, and we can say, this is a traditional food, and this is not McDonald's, this is not Burger King. While we understand the role that those foods can play in making sure that you're not starving and going hungry, we also want to reintroduce you back to your indigenous foods. And what you see right there is a young man eating a squash, and that's because that young person had never eaten a fresh vegetable before. And we were able to introduce them for the first time to a non-fast food, indigenous cultivated traditional food of that person's ancestral story, and have them eat it for the first time, harvest it, and then take it home with their family to share into their food systems when they got home that night. It was a pretty powerful moment. So what does it mean to return land back on a larger scale in the Northern California landscape? It's almost impossible. And what we realize is that inside of the United States, Indigenous land access is a very hard conversation, as it is everywhere around the world. And we're very, very honored, and I get goosebumps even when I talk about it still, to have had the opportunity to walk through a land access project ourselves. It's important for me as an intertribal organization and as a Yaqui woman who recognizes that the land beneath my feet are not my home base. I'm a guest here. That when we had this opportunity to walk through a land back project, our first instinct was not to accept it ourselves, but was to actually work with this landowner, return the land back to the traditional people there. The traditional people of the ground that you're seeing here in this Sonoma County landscape, which is currently known now as Sebastopol, is the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. And we contacted them and worked in good protocol to try and return this project to their landscape. And through good conversation and through many conversations and meetings, for their own reasons, they had capacity problems at that moment. They had their own hands full with a land project that they were trying to work through. And so they looked at us and said, could you please? And we had never considered the possibility of being a land-based organization. But as a Native woman, when you get the opportunity at your feet, you're not sure that you can say no to land. And you're worried that maybe your ancestors might start poking you at night, a little like this. So we worked very hard with many circles to try and make that happen. And you're now looking at Heron Shadow. And Heron Shadow has first and foremost been an Indigenous revitalization project. You can see there, while we love those beautiful flowers, those were not necessarily Indigenous flowers. So we worked through bringing back cultural practice such as Indigenous fire. We brought back fire cultivation as part of our California native landscape here. We're restoring our wetland and riparian zone, as you can see here, bringing back what it means to have healthy water and healthy land to then step into food cultivation. And the food cultivation that we do there is 100% focused in Indigenous and heirloom seeds. We work only with those Indigenous heirloom seeds and then work with communities and seed rematriation to return them back so that folks can be working both in food cultivation, but also ongoing ancestral seed memory. Here's some pictures of some of our beautiful landscape as our first couple of seasons. We are focused in Three Sisters agriculture, corns, beans, and squash, but as our beautiful sister, Rowan White, an incredible Mohawk seed keeper woman, has always said, the fourth sister is whoever's in season. Here is a beautiful opportunity that I have to say, in the world of climate resilience, especially in California, what does it mean to have water access issue conversations? What you're looking at the right there is the marriage of traditional ecological knowledge with Indigenous food cultivation. That squash yield was dry farmed just before we had our first real rains in over 50 years in Northern California, which was the last winter, 2022 to 2023. That squash yield that you see there was dry farmed in 2022. She was planted seeds directly into the ground, watered once, and then we walked away. And there she is. What you see there is our local Indigenous chef, Chef Crystal Wapapa, who is now a James Beard Award chef, who helped to open the first Indigenous restaurant in Oakland, California, right there in the Fruitvale. And we are very honored to be a partner. Chef Crystal takes our squash and she serves it through her food in her Indigenous Food Systems restaurant. And then her team saves squash seeds, returns back to the field, and we invite her chefs and her team to come and grow their own food now that they are serving in their restaurant. It's a very wonderful circle. We also have the capacity to go out into the food system with food boxes. Through all of the work and food that we grow, we do not sell it. We have decided that we would like to try and change the economic conversation of food. If we have that small power inside of our small communities, we like to say that we are growing food because people are hungry. We're not feeding them because they can afford to buy it. So all of the food that we grow is 100% donated out to our communities. We also, now that we are established as part of that Napa and Sonoma County agricultural large system, are working with community partners there to also donate food to us. And through that deep partnership, we're now donating about 16,000 pounds of food every year out into the San Francisco Bay Area intertribal communities to feed families. It's very wonderful. This is some of our team and all of our community doing work. We are 100% donation based. So we're always looking for good support. And that support is not just through the wonderful and incredible funding networks that we're working to try and help raise the awareness inside of those Indigenous funding networks with incredible partners like Indigenous funders, International Funders for Indigenous Peoples, IFIP, who's one of the beautiful partners in this circle today, but also through the help of many hands. So as we work in land projects, we're also open to volunteer work. You're all invited. Please come to Northern California to Heron Shadow. We could use your hands on the land. Please come and hang out with the trees and plant some seeds and help us grow food for community. Some of our deep sharing, we also are committed 100% to education. We want intergenerational knowledge sharing happening everywhere we can look. Anytime we are stepping into land practice and cultural reconnection, we have our young people there with our elder people so that we are working in intergenerational knowledge exchange, and that is grounded in traditional ecological knowledge exchange as a priority moving forward. Thank you, everybody. I wanted to leave that up for as a quick minute too. The Native Seed Pod, part of our educational sharing is we opened up a podcast. So you can go to the Native Seed Pod and listen to us sharing with our community partners, the wonderful voices and networks of the circles that we work together. I'm sorry, I dance and move a lot. As Daniel mentioned, I'm a dancer. So please join our incredible hoop dance. Join the many hoop dances of the circles that you're seeing here on this incredible knowledge sharing network. I'm just really honored to share our little story with you guys today amongst the incredible work that's being shared here across the globe. So thank you, everybody, very much. Look forward to our ongoing connections and supporting each other moving forward.
Wow, thank you so much, Sarah, and especially for that kind invitation to join your circles as well, and let's join all of our circles together and celebrate and work. So thank you. Really great to hear about all of the returning native land, native hands, the restoration of the land itself, but the restoration of rights and food systems. And thank you so much for that example and sharing your work. We're going to turn now to question and answer, and you can see on your screen that there's a place to do so, and we have quite a bunch of interesting questions and comments in there, and I'm going to dig into that so that we can talk about that a little bit and ask our speakers to respond to your inquiries. But before I do, there's a couple of people that have joined the webinar this morning that I wanted to recognize if they're able to connect, that we wanted to just give a couple of minutes to. So as I recognize you, if you can just speak to her just a couple of minutes, because we wanted to bring in your perspective to this conversation. And the first person I wanted to bring in, and I mentioned her at the beginning of the talk of the conversation today, is Isapi Rua, who's involved in many initiatives and is a member of the Red Tejiendo Historias, which is the Weaving Stories Network, which is the largest intercultural journalism community in Latin America. And she covers issues related to Indigenous people, climate, food sovereignty, and rights. And so, Isapi, I was wondering if you could just share with us a little bit about your work. And again, as I mentioned, folks, Isapi is going to be working with us to do some journalism about this gathering today, so we can share the stories that we've shared with one another with a broader audience. So please go ahead for a minute or two if you're able to unmute, Isapi, and speak with us.
Sí, gracias. Creo que identifico muchos puntos de convergencia entre las experiencias que se han compartido desde Bolivia. Por ejemplo, con el periodismo indígena estamos rescatando estos conocimientos ancestrales de los sistemas alimentarios que están interconectados con otros sistemas también, con el sistema de educación, con el sistema de medicina tradicional, con el sistema de la espiritualidad que está ligada a toda la gestión, a toda la administración de los recursos naturales en los territorios indígenas en Bolivia, que si bien tenemos muchas normativas, entre ellas leyes que garantizan los derechos no solamente de los pueblos indígenas, sino de la madre tierra, pues hay muchos desafíos que enfrentar. Entre estos, el poder recuperar el conocimiento mediante el registro, no solo para generar narrativas desde el periodismo y en la comunicación indígena, para que se pueda tejer en diálogos los conocimientos de la agroecología, sino también para poder sensibilizar a las nuevas generaciones de los pueblos indígenas, sobre todo a los que han migrado hacia centros urbanos y que por la pandemia han vuelto a refugiarse en los territorios indígenas y a recuperar la medicina tradicional para enfrentar la pandemia, también recuperar sistemas alimentarios que estaban casi perdidos dentro de las comunidades. Entonces creo que el reto desde el periodismo indígena es poder rescatar las prácticas espirituales y poder tejerlas también con otros conocimientos y diálogos con la ciencia, porque los sistemas alimentarios también se desafían a poder conversar y converger con tecnología, con innovación frente a las crisis climáticas. En estos momentos, por ejemplo, en Bolivia estamos sufriendo incendios forestales que está devastando muchos bosques dentro de reservas, áreas protegidas que están con territorios indígenas y los impactos son devastadores. Entonces quedan esos desafíos de poder sensibilizar no solamente a la población de centros urbanos, sino también a la población indígena joven, que cada vez migra hacia centros urbanos y que dentro de la comunicación indígena es uno de los retos que nosotros vamos posicionando en diferentes espacios, ¿no? De comunicación interna al interior de los grupos en las comunidades, sobre todo con mujeres jóvenes que se enfrentan a muchas violencias de proyectos extractivos como petroleros y mineros que todavía están desarrollándose en Bolivia y a otras violencias que genera la memoria de la colonización y el sistema de empatronamiento, especialmente en el pueblo guaraní, ¿no? Así que pues tratamos de generar esas conversaciones y por eso agradezco al espacio por permitirme reforzar esta narrativa de que somos globales como pueblos indígenas, no tenemos fronteras en conocimientos y es posible tejerlo para generar soluciones a problemáticas que enfrentan las sociedades en estos momentos. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Isapi, and thank you for your journalism work on this critical topic. I just want to recognize one other person, if I may, before we turn to the question and answers. We're joined today by quite a number of participants, it looks like, in the participant list from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I wanted to ask if Diel Moshir might say some words with us this morning. Just a couple of minutes, Diel. I'm sorry to cut you short. And Diel is from the Integrated Program for the Development of the Pygmy People, and working in that Congo basin on indigenous food systems. And recently participated in a meeting of the Alliance for Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities for Conservation in Africa that happened in Namibia at the end of last month. So Diel, if you can share, if you're able to unmute and share a couple of words with us about.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Nous tenons à remercier Agroecology et tous ses partenaires, et surtout pour vraiment les soutiens, l'appui, l'accompagnement aux organisations autochtones de la République démocratique du Congo. Par rapport au Congrès, nous avions eu à influencer d'une manière générale la voix des peuples autochtones d'Afrique centrale sur la question des suivis de la PAC Kigali, où en Namibie, on a été dans l'obligation de réfléchir comment arriver à mettre en place un cadre de concertation pour la conservation de la biodiversité, mais aussi pour respecter vraiment l'écologie à travers une agriculture durable. Et là aussi, ça a été suivi par le sommet de 3 bassins forestiers qui s'est tenu à Brazzaville presque à la même date pour essayer de faire attendre la voix des peuples autochtones tout en mettant en place des mécanismes de respect et de reconnaissance des territoires de vie, des espaces de vie des peuples autochtones et aussi à capitaliser tout ce qui est marché carbone, mais en se fondant sur le savoir traditionnel des peuples autochtones dans la protection de l'environnement, les systèmes agroécologiques. Ça a été un bon moment pour nous de partager avec l'ensemble des peuples autochtones l'expérience de l'Afrique centrale qui a mis en place toute une stratégie et qui est une stratégie qui est en cours, qui a facilité à travers cette stratégie, on a été à mesure de faire le premier forum des femmes autochtones d'Afrique centrale et des communautés locales avec une feuille de route sur laquelle on est en train de suivre en vue de pouvoir comprendre les défis, les succès, mais aussi les efforts des femmes en lien avec la conservation, les systèmes alimentaires durables, en vue de la conservation de la biodiversité. À travers ces 2 événements, pour nous, ça a été un grand succès. Parce qu'avec la limitation de la langue pour l'Afrique centrale, étant regroupant les pays des bassins du Congo comme l'un des 3 bassins forestiers, on a été dans la possibilité de démontrer nos savoirs traditionnels, comment on est en train de mettre en place des mécanismes, pas seulement liés à la production, mais aussi à la transformation des produits locaux, à leur évacuation, mais aussi faire les liens avec la nature, les ancêtres, ainsi de suite. Donc, en se fondant sur le cadre stratégique du REPALEC, on a été à mesure vraiment d'influencer que les cadres stratégiques prennent en compte les niveaux de savoir traditionnel des peuples autochtones forestiers qui vivent de la chasse, de la cueillette, mais aussi de la pêche. Et tout ça à travers un aspect respectueux de l'environnement où les communautés locales ont développé des astuces de conservation de manière tacite. Et le gouvernement, que ce soit en Namibie, que ce soit au Congo-Brazza, ont été conscients que, en réalité, les peuples autochtones ont conservé et continuent à conserver et leurs valeurs ajoutées doivent être capitalisées dans tout ce qu'on est en train de faire. C'est
Thank
dans
you.
ce cadre-là où
We'll
nous
need
sommes en
to
train de
wrap it up
préparer.
now. Thank you so much. I'm sorry to have to cut you off. We're just nearing the end of the webinar, but really appreciate your words from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. We're going to turn to one more colleague who has joined us from the Amazon in Peru. I'd like to recognize Ronald Suarez to speak with us for a minute or two from the Pueblo Shipibo in Peru. Please tell us a little bit about how the drought is affecting the indigenous people's food system in the Peruvian Amazon. Thank you so much.
Wait.
Ronald, please go ahead if you're able to unmute. Ronald. Well, Ronald, please, if you're able to unmute, please join in. In the meantime, I want to signal to people that we have a question and answer tab in your screen. And we have many very, very interesting questions that I'm afraid we won't really have time to get to. But I'll take a quick glance at them and mention some of the topics. And we'll turn over to our speakers to make some final words before we close up this webinar in about 10 minutes time. But Ronald, again, you're very welcome to unmute if you are able to join us. But here's a couple of things that I saw on the question and answer. And again, I encourage you to look at the very good questions there. There were questions about the impacts of mining and extractive industries in indigenous territories. There were questions about politics, especially in Myanmar, about the dictatorship and the impacts on food sovereignty. Questions about the term agroecology and its relationship to indigenous people's food systems. Is it a limiting term or a helpful term? There were questions about an important indigenous peoples network called the ICCA Consortium, about its role in working to advance indigenous people's food systems. There were questions about the Plants Treaty within the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. How is that helpful or not? More curiosity about saving seeds and how that's done. That was a question specifically for Danielle from Kenya. There was a question about policies that we can all support for indigenous people's food systems. We are joined by a number of colleagues from India that were curious about millets and how millets appear in other indigenous people's food systems, being such an important crop in India subcontinent. There was a question about beekeepers and how beekeepers are organized. We heard from Danielle and from Milka about the importance of beekeeping. There was a question about a notable shift in many indigenous people's food systems from traditional patterns to more commercial and cash-oriented, and whether that's a common observation or a common characteristic of evolving indigenous people's food systems. So there you can see tons of really fascinating curiosity, and I didn't manage to get through the whole list of questions. But with that, I want to turn over to our speakers again to maybe just share some closing comments with us in light of the questions, in light of what they've heard from their colleagues from other territories. So if I could, I might start with you, Paul, noting again that for Paul, it's now well past midnight. And thank you again for staying with us on the webinar today. So please share with us a couple of closing comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Danielle, for these opportunities and also hearing many good stories and experiences from different regions. Yeah, regarding the questions, definitely the dictatorship or the military junta, all the armed conflicts has been all one of the greatest also challenges or threat to our indigenous peoples and our sovereignty, right? I think there's conflicts everywhere. Created many problems and also shocks to the indigenous peoples to respond. That's why, our current people, we trying to find ways and then trying to, initiate the different kind of initiatives and also movement to really counter these threats. And armed conflict dictatorships is also, linked to other threats as well, like mentioned by many friends here, like other issue linked to commodifications and other capital kind of capitalism markets and the cash crops and other things that really moving away from our kind of roots. So my kind of comment is that we have to return back to our roots to find solutions. I think the food that we indigenous people eat, we have to go back to the nearest to our food source. I always measure with my arm's distance about maybe less than a meter to grow to eat, and less distance meaning we have more healthy food, more tasty, and also, in the crisis that we are facing today, the climate change, things like that. That's the solution that we need to go back to our Mother Earth, our Mother Nature, like Maria has also wonderfully shared with us. No, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. We'll turn now over to Danielle joining us from Kenya, if you'd like to make some closing comments. And please, Ronald, if you're able to unmute, maybe following Danielle, please jump in. Go ahead, Danielle.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks to all the presenters, brothers and sisters. Very useful comments and information presented. One of the things which I saw, one of the questions about land tenure for indigenous peoples, that how can we help to support IPs ensuring land tenure? I think it is something which can only be done if we begin, especially to the investors, to be able to have some safeguards for indigenous peoples, so that whenever they're investing in our countries, whether it is a blue economy or blue carbon or whichever, that they should be able to understand and respect the rights of indigenous people in their territories. So those kind of companies or investors should really respect those who are on the ground before they can do whatever projects they're doing. About the beekeepers, I know most beekeepers, they are not very good in doing cooperatives. In some areas, yes, we have cooperatives trying to combine effort to get market for their honey. But my brother from, I think, Bangladesh, I've already responded to him that we can be able to share more. For this kind of about seeds, I know many people have said they have a way. I'm available, especially for the wild berries and other tubers from the forest. How we can be able to be able to bank, or rather have the seed for future, because most of them are getting extinct. As we were growing, some of them are getting extinct because nobody is following up. Very few of the young people are interested to go back deep to the forest. So some of the seeds can disappear. So I may say that as we work together closely, and I'm seeing many Kenyans who are there who say they have a way, please reach out. We can be able to share a bit of complementarity in what we are doing. Thank you very much, and God bless everyone.
Thank you, Daniel. And I just saw in the chat a couple of more solidarity messages with the struggle of the Ujek people. And thank you for that. I think especially in the world of donors and investors, it's our job as well to put pressure on other people that are moving money to respect the rights of indigenous peoples everywhere. And we can do all this fantastic work to strengthen indigenous food systems, but we have to work to resist these very damaging investments and programs. If I can turn over to Maria Pedro, please, to say a few closing words. Thank you, Maria Pedro. The floor is yours.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Estoy viendo algunas preguntas. No sé si todavía se puede dar alguna respuesta o cerramos. ¿Sí? Muy bien. En este caso hay una pregunta que si dentro de la producción para el consumo de las comunidades tienen también una producción excedente para venta o no. ¿Qué relación hay entre una producción alimentaria y el mercado? Pues algo muy importante. Primero es la seguridad alimentaria o la soberanía alimentaria. Garantizar una alimentación para nuestra propia familia, reducir el hambre cero, la desnutrición y otras enfermedades. Garantizando todo ese proceso, si hay excedente, por supuesto, tenemos que también proceder a la comercialización de nuestros productos en nuestras comunidades, en el mercado local y, por supuesto, dentro de la ley de alimentación escolar. Porque es una ley, como lo dije en su momento, es una ley que sí nos ha dado esta oportunidad para la comercialización de nuestros productos locales y, por supuesto, para mejorar la economía de nuestras comunidades. En la segunda, si existe una ocasión para agradecer la cosecha en la cultura anual, sí. Nuestros principios ancestrales, que algo he aprendido de mis abuelos, abuelas, mis papás, cuando uno empieza a sembrar, uno tiene que pedir permiso. Conforme va a ir creciendo la milpa, por ejemplo, a mediados del año, se prepara un atol especial y se le da un vasito como un tipo de ofrecimiento a todas las herramientas que intervinieron en la preparación del terreno. Y en otro punto decía, perdone que voy a leer las preguntas, que una pregunta dice sobre una iniciativa de ley cuando considera que es la estrategia que se considera relevante de nuestros instrumentos de política para garantizar el desarrollo agroecológico en Guatemala. Me imagino que es una hermana o un hermano que me está haciendo esta pregunta. Nuestra realidad en Guatemala es muy polémico. Todos son conocedores a través de las redes sociales de lo que estamos atravesando. Existe un sistema político corrupto, un sistema político donde existen monopolios que no hacen prevalecer los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Prueba de ella, han habido leyes en Guatemala que solo favorece al sector latifundios, al sector monopolio, pero no están viendo las necesidades de los pueblos. Hablemos, la ley del cambio climático, la ley Monsanto, que son la privatización de las semillas nativas, la ley del agua, la ley de los medios de comunicación en Guatemala. Entonces, prácticamente, ¿a dónde nos conlleva? A llevar aún seguir viviendo como pobres, como un país subdesarrollado. Precisamente nosotros como lideresas hemos tenido la oportunidad y agradecemos en este momento. Yo sé que hay personalidades cooperantes que nos están escuchando. Gracias a ustedes a través de nuestras... ¿Me escuchan?
Sí, pero si puedes ir terminando, por favor.
Muy bien. A través de los cooperantes hemos logrado presentar propuestas de proyectos que ha venido fortaleciendo nuestros sistemas alimentarios ancestrales. Muchas gracias. Lo poco que puedo responder de las 3 preguntas que me aparecieron en el chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria Pedro, for those comments and a little bit more getting to peek inside the Guatemalan system. And please, let's turn over for a last word from Sarah Moncada. Please go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of time. I know we're right up against the end of our time together, so I'll just keep my last comments to just deep and profound gratitude. Thank you for the opportunity to connect and share. Thank you for the opportunity to expand our networks and our resources and our capacity to understand one another and celebrate the incredible work that's happening in Indigenous communities. I hope that we all continue to invest and support in these small, big, medium, and every other sized projects that come out, because each one of them is profound, even if we're just meeting the needs of you know, a young farmer trying to understand those systems for the first time, or feeding a community of thousands. Each step of those is an important step. So thank you to each one of us who've come here today to share this good morning together. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Agroecology Fund. Thank you, IFIP. Thank you, everybody. May we all continue our good work together.
You said it all, Sarah. Thank you so much. The Agroecology Fund is deeply honored to be able to accompany Indigenous peoples in their work to strengthen their food systems. So we thank all of you for your important work, and we look forward to our continued close connection as we work in solidarity with one another to do the work that we all need to do. So with that, I think we will close this session, and thank you so much to our participants from all over the world. Some of you who stayed up quite late to join us to be part of this conversation. Yes, people asked, we will be sharing presentations and the recording. And as I mentioned, Isapi will be working on an article with us. So we will be in touch, and we look forward to being in touch and strengthening our connections and networks with one another. Have a good morning, a good evening, a good night, and we'll be in touch next time. Be well. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, que tengan feliz día.
Gracias.
Gracias a todas y todos.
Gracias, María, Pedro.
Chocolatasia.
Gracias. Feliz día.
Gracias. Thank you, everybody.
Gracias.
Au revoir,